So because the camera is up here, I'm going to try and stay up here. But my instinct will be to go straight to you, and then all the camera will get will be video, audio, which is fine with me. We'll get started and let people join. First of all, thank you. I know my topic name, Unlearning, the hardest part of learning, is probably sort of one of the more amorphous topics that you get here. And that's probably why some of you are here. It's much more of a macro discussion on thinking and learning. And it was not my original desire to present, but I'll get to that in a moment. Let me start at the beginning. I'm supposed to introduce myself. So I'm supposed to introduce myself. I'm told that my edge is right here, so if I stray too far, let me know. My name is Deb Cohen, and I'm a law professor. I have been a law professor for more than 20 years. We'll leave it at that. I am also the director of academic success, and I have been involved with CALI since about 1995. My first CALI conference was 2001. And originally, I've presented at various times on various topics at CALI. And we have here today a presentation that I'm doing, because originally I was going to present on something about the difference between digital natives and digital immigrants in the classroom as a law professor, and Elmer saw an early version of this presentation and said, do this instead. So if you don't like it, it's all Elmer's fault. The other presentation would have been amazing. Before I get started, I like to get an idea of who's in my room. So, how many law professors are here? Any? How many librarians? Any tech people? Cool. So we've got the whole array, and I think the topic really is, you'll see some relevance for each of your areas. Okay, so let me get started. I've already told you that I'm a professor and the director of academic success, but let me also start with the fact that I'm this middle child. Middle child day isn't until August, but we can all celebrate early. Any other middle children here? Middle of 3 girls, okay? And the middle child generally has this reputation, and I bear it true, of being the person who sort of tries to fix everything. So half my family is lawyers and half my family is teachers. So guess what I did? I am a law professor. So it's not surprising I ended up here when you look at it, but it was when I originally started. So I've been doing this, as I said, for a very, very long time. And over the years, I have noticed that, have you noticed this? Law students get stressed. No, I'm telling you something new. Not like that. And, you know, it's not a secret. Law school is stressful. People have been talking about this for a long time. Why is law school stressful? And it's an interesting question, and why are some people more stressed than others? Okay, how many of you went to law school? All right. Did you find law school stressful? Did anyone not find law school stressful? Parts of it. Yeah. I found parts of it incredibly stressful, but other parts were kind of fun. Now, I elected to go to school in Atlanta because I knew that they studied for exams by pool. That definitely helped. But, okay, so law school is stressful. And it's not a surprise, but people for the last probably 20 years, humanizing legal education, other areas, they're trying to figure out why is law school so stressful. And I have particularly noticed in my capacity in academic success that my underperforming law students seem particularly stressed. So I have started out on my quest to figure out why. What is it about law school that makes it so hard? And my premise was that if I could figure out what made it so different, if I could find the root cause, okay, maybe business people out there know in business school we talk about root causes. No, I haven't went to business school. But if I could figure out the root cause, I might have a shot at fixing it. Yeah?
Shouldn't it be hard?
Pardon?
Shouldn't it be hard?
Shouldn't it be hard?
Shouldn't it be a little stressful and hard?
Hard and stressful are different things. Stress has should be somewhat, because stress is a motivator. But there's a point of diminishing returns, and if you look at the stress curve, which I actually don't have in this presentation, but there is a point at which you pass optimal stress. Yes, it should be stressful enough to get people out of bed and go to classes and do the work. But when it gets to the point that it starts interfering with their success, it's too stressful. So I'm not suggesting we make it unstressful. I'm just trying to figure out why it's stressful, which parts make it stressful. Okay? And so I've been on this journey to try and figure out why is law school so stressful. And, you know, unlike my law students, I would love to find the answer, right? This is every law student, every student, there is an answer, and if I could just find it, I could fix the problem. One size fits all. So I fall into that, and I tell my students this regularly. There's not going to be, there'll be wrong answers, but rarely, and sometimes with statutes there are, but rarely is there one right answer. So in talking about it and thinking about it, I'm like, okay, can I find the right answer? And I've been hoping over the time to do that. And in the process, I've been looking around to figure it out. However, to quote my favorite movie, I just had to be disappointed. There is not going to, you all know the reference? Mm-hmm. I figured it was a safe audience. I was destined for disappointment if I thought I could figure out the one reason why law school was stressful. Now, if I'm asked to generalize, and I often am, I will tell you that law school is stressful because it is a major life transition. Okay? For most of the law students who come in, they come in as first years. And over the course of 3 years, they have major, major life changes. There is student development theory out there that actually talks about the role, the routines, the relationships, and the beliefs that have to evolve over the course of law school. And the first year is particularly stressful because that's when they're moving in. And they're going from being an expert or qualified at whatever they did in their life beforehand to being a novice, a beginner. And for those of us who have ever gone back to try something new, becoming a beginner again is really hard. We don't like to necessarily go back to square one and start as not knowing how. It's challenging. And so the process of learning to think like a lawyer is a major life change. And change is hard, and change is stressful. So should law school be stressful? Yes, of course, but how much? Now, beyond the broad generalizations of that, it gets complicated. Now, that's not a surprise to anyone either. What makes law school stressful for each student is different. While each and every one of them come in and sit in these seats for the first day of orientation or the first day of class or the exam, each of them experiences it differently. Because no one arrives with a blank slate. Every one of them arrives with the life experience, the prior knowledge that got them to law school. So if you're going to have prior knowledge, it's going to have an impact. Now, there are lots of kinds of prior knowledge. Okay? And I'm going to talk about the kinds of prior knowledge in a moment. But I want to talk about why prior knowledge is so important. Okay? So here's my chart. This is probably the slide I have with the most writing on it, because I don't believe in slides with writing. My vision is so bad. I can't see them, so I can't use them. So, if prior knowledge, if the knowledge you bring in is accurate and appropriate for the circumstances, you're golden. It is going to help you learn, hence the happy face. But if your prior knowledge is either inaccurate and or inappropriate for the circumstance, it can get in the way. It can hinder the learning. And so, the fact that they don't come with that clean slate, the fact that there's all sorts of stuff written on that slate, all of their knowledge, totally impacts how they're going to learn. And this is not just law school. This is cognitive science and learning theory that applies to people's expectations and beliefs about IT and the library. So it really is generally appropriate to all of it. And so people come with all of this prior knowledge, and I'm here to say that the hardest part of learning is not learning the new stuff. It's unlearning the bad stuff, the stuff that's inaccurate or inappropriate that gets in the way, that creates a resistance to the change, a resistance to the new knowledge. Because when you come in with what you have in your limited view, you see things in a particular way. I love this slide. So, what am I talking about in terms of prior knowledge? There are generally two categories of prior knowledge. There is the general knowledge, and I'll use law school because I can do it, but we'll take a moment after that and let you all talk about what they come to your disciplines with. Okay, so I'm a contracts professor, and people come to law school thinking that this piece of paper is the contract. It doesn't have to be this piece of paper. You can have an oral contract. But they come thinking that this piece of paper, this is the contract. No, this is a representation. They come thinking that property is something tangible. This is property. But we all know that there's intellectual property, right? It doesn't have to be tangible. They come to criminal law, which I'm teaching this semester, with the law and order view. And I was going to do sound, but I haven't gotten that far. So, dun, dun. Okay. So they come with all of these preconceived notions about law school. But those aren't the ones I'm worried about. Because those are the ones that in the course of discussion in classroom, I figure out. Like, I know what they're talking about. I see in a conversation that, oh, they have this lay perception, this lay view of something. And while that lay view, put my clicker down, while that lay view might be accurate in the real world, it's inappropriate for the law school setting. And so I have to, in the classroom, work with them to say, okay, that's a lay view, that's fine. That may work in everyday world, but it doesn't work in law. And I'm sure if we take a moment, you can all think of things that they come to the library or tech support with that, or your classrooms, with these thoughts. That's the easier kind of knowledge, prior knowledge to overcome. The harder one are the assumptions and the beliefs that they bring with them. The ones that are so ingrained from their upbringing, their past, their experiences, they're not even conscious of them. Now, in the law school setting, I'm talking about the ones where they think, at orientation, where we teach them all how to read and brief, oh, I don't read that, I know how to read and brief. Or, I know how to take a law school exam. Or, I know how to do all of this. I know how to study. For some IT people, I know how my computer works. I know how to figure things out. I know what to expect from the library, though less and less I'm sure that students do know that. I think some of them haven't even been to a library. So these are the ones that really get in the way because they're not even conscious. They're so ingrained, they're second nature. And getting students to recognize that and perhaps let go of them to move on, that is the challenge. So, I try telling them, sometimes better than others, I want my students, to quote Daniel Borstein, the hardest part of learning isn't ignorance. It's the illusion of knowledge. I think it's a wonderful quote, right? It's what they think they know. So my mission is to sort of help them not only deal with the obvious ones about actual knowledge, facts, and figures, but to try and deal with the ones that are those much more subconscious beliefs. So before I turn to how do we deal with this and my suggestions, I'd like us all to take a moment to sort of share, think, pair, share, you know. What is it? What are some of the assumptions that you see people bringing to your domain, whatever it is? Now that you're thinking about it, some of the obvious facts and figures and some of the less obvious beliefs. So everyone take a moment, talk to the person next to you. You know, you have to do social things to figure out if there are amendments. Oh, by the way, I'm an amendment if anyone still needs an amendment. I think I'm the 27th amendment about vice presidential.
That must be everything.
I am unlearning everything when I was in the first 2 years about conflict resolution. So that's all about how you have to know the truth in order to resolve the conflict. What? What do you mean the truth doesn't matter? Yeah, right.
I'm having a hard time. I mean, I
the idea that you think about there might be a solution where there's no enlightenment, no reason. They like that
I do more than
well, I mean, technology. They think like solutions are something like press a button, yeah. And that, you know, and especially when someone has something like Twitter, you can't like. I mean, I heard this example one time. It's like when you go to a mechanic and you should get symptoms and not say, I think it's a timing change. Or like they try to figure out. But worse, more things I just like people. They'll say, I'm good.
I thought it was going to be more than it was. It was really not a problem. I think so. And so I think, well, okay, that's what it is.
That's true.
It certainly was surprising to me that that was talk to people. So that was good.
That's what's coming next. That is what's coming next. That's exactly what's coming next.
Stay up.
So students.
Okay, I'm going to interrupt for a moment because someone just raised the issue that comes next.
And then when you do anything,
I'd like you to share some of the ones you think people bring, and then what we're going to do is go back and talk about what assumptions we bring. Unless you already did that in your conversations. Because I think this does work on both sides. So let's start with what we think about, and I'll just go around the room and take some. So what kind of assumptions did your group talk about that people bring to various things?
In my case, I teach immigration law. And you're talking about the students coming. They think that immigration law is all about problems in the border. That's it. It's about that, deporting people. They don't understand that there's business and investments and all this.
So they have a very narrow view, a lay view of immigration, probably based on popular media largely.
Yeah.
And we have to expand that. What did your group come up with?
A couple things. First of all, one of the things that I've run up against, not necessarily so much with students, but oftentimes throughout my career, is somebody will parse the words in my title and say, oh, you work in instructional technology, therefore you must do this, and it's completely, I can't think of a specific example, but it's like, yes, those words go together, but not in the way you think they do. And Matt was talking about, how there's a lot of assumptions of greater knowledge in terms of systems design just because you can use something. You may be a user, but you're not a designer, you're not an engineer, you're not an architect, you don't know how these things work under the hood.
In response to Jill's, I again go back to my favorite movie. Do not think those words mean what you think. What about your group? What did you come up with, what people bring that you see as knowledge, prior knowledge that may not be accurate or appropriate for the circumstances?
Well, mine was for research, and the librarians would know that. You can find everything on Westlaw. Or online for free. Or online for free, yeah. Or
Not just Westlaw. I can just Google
Or
it.
I can just
that, all those types of assumptions about information. And then we had one here with forms.
Yeah, well, the public patron, there's a form for everything.
All I need to do is fill in the
Absolutely.
Mad Lib of law.
That's
Right?
right.
The Mad Lib, name, address, it's just a Mad
The
Lib.
clerk sent me here to get the form.
Your group.
So we represent many different perspectives. We talk about different assumptions, talk about the library assumption. Oh, we already know how to do this. The idea is that the students come in, we already know how to do this. We already know, I'm just trying to teach them technology. Oh, I already know Word. I already know this. And they've been told, oh, you're a digital native. Of course you know all this. And I find that that's not always the case.
They think they're expert at it because they've been doing it for a really long time, and they don't get that while that is absolutely true, it may not be appropriate for law society. Others from your group?
We didn't talk about this, but it just occurred to me, they also think they're an expert at it because someone gave them an A. I got an A in this before. I'm really good at this.
She was also talking about the pre-law programs that apparently also bizarrely set people up in the wrong direction.
Oh, I think they're...
I'd love to talk to you about that afterwards.
I find a lot of students who come in with a pre-law degree of some kind of criminology. They have lots of different names and iterations. They come in thinking that they're going to be terrific law students, and they're really disappointed.
They grow up being told that because they like to argue, they will be good lawyers, and they have made that ingrained assumption or belief, which may or may not be true. In the back.
Well, just very broadly, the first thing we talked about is that a lot of them, because they've written a research paper in college, they know how to research. I'm like, oh, but you've never done legal research. That's all about strategy and time management and efficiency and learning all sorts of new databases. And they just assume that it's not. Even if they take advanced legal research, they still assume, they seem to assume that they know more than I do about the database. It's always fun. But as you were saying earlier, they always want the one right answer. So we also, I'm sure we all have students who think that there should be like one case that is completely going to answer their client file. And that's the fun of legal research. You're going to put together all sorts of cases and statutes and regs and secondary sources, and then you're going to find your answer. Yeah.
Or you're going to have to create it.
Right.
For me, it was basically a mentality that they bring. I'm at Duke University. And a lot of times they were the big fish in the small pond where they came from. And then when they're thrust into other big fish that came from their own small ponds, it's really hard for them to be able to adjust it to the fact that when everyone else have their first assignment that they have to turn in, they have all this damage control and basically they give them pizza and they have free massages. Because, you know, that student that never got a B gets one, and then it's like, you know, they're rethinking their whole life after that.
And again, people, and I'm not sure, which we're going to go to in a second, that we're any different on many levels in different contexts. But we're the expert in law school. What would happen, you know, or librarians or IT, what would happen if you went back and had to learn something totally new? Would you be an expert to start? Would you, the fact that you've been so successful in everything you've done, lead you to believe that, oh, I can do this easy? I don't think they're necessarily wrong for believing what they believe. It's gotten them to where they are, right? If it's not broken, don't fix it. This has worked very well for me. So now let's switch and be a little bit more reflective personally, because once you've looked at it from what they bring, which drives you crazy, right? It pushes all your buttons. How could they not see this? Now let's see if we can flip it and look at ourselves, because I've also realized along the way that I bring a lot of knowledge to the classroom that may not always be accurate or appropriate for that. So let's break up again and talk about it from the flip side. People are much quieter.
How do you know, I mean, as a teacher, I feel there's times you feel like you have. Are there things that you have to cast aside?
Bring themselves in and just much more like when you're working something.
You might probably know how
They didn't actually.
when
When I asked
so that was a huge moment for me. Every year,
Visualize.
Anything in your methodology?
Near that vocabulary of items, like what is it that?
What things?
I mean, you're not obvious what this is, right? Very different idea or no idea.
I like.
So I was surprised to find out where that.
I don't like the sprout. They have days.
Okay, so let's start back.
They're asleep. I don't know. I don't know the answer. I
This way, it turns out.
Is the problem? You go in.
Have you found something that you've kind of advocated or taught as a concept, discovered that there was a flaw or misconception somewhere in the foundation?
Yes. They're adults. You can trust them. And they're responsible. And I'm going to keep everybody in class. I'm not here to discriminate. I'm involved. So that's a good example. You got me going to the spread. That's the problem I have. I've always believed. Good man. Let the heart take you. If they keep that's the mind.
Or, I mean, even
So it was a little harder, wasn't it? Okay, what's yours?
There's always something new out there. You know, a student might come to you and say, oh, have you tried this? You know, you can do this. So they have this new app for this. And then you're like, oh, okay. Because it's always something new.
And are you receptive to that, or do you find some resistance to change?
Oh, no, I'm receptive to it because you have to be in technology. Or
You have to be in technology, okay.
Yes.
Any others that you think that you find that, oh, maybe my knowledge isn't quite so right?
One thing I try to remember, like an assumption that I have is, I'm a librarian, is that of course I think like legal research is like the most important skill they must have in law school. But if you look at surveys of hiring partners, firms, things like that, skills students need when they come out, legal research is high on many of those lists. There are many other skills that are really important too. And the students are trying to like balance learning all of those in addition to what I'm teaching them. So try to remember that.
And if we think that what we're teaching is the most important thing, that's going to have an impact, right? It's not even obvious, but the awareness of that is awesome.
Well, we talked about assuming that students know more than they do when they come into your room. So again, I'm a librarian, I teach legal research. And just taking for granted the things that they may not know already. Even small things that seem like something surely they learned in their substantive courses by now. But they may not have, and you'll start hitting blank faces and you're like, I've already lost you, I'm not sure
I taught a
what
whole
happened.
session on dockets, and like 20 minutes in, I realized no one knew what a docket was.
Yeah.
And I'm so embarrassed that I hadn't thought.
But you shouldn't be, because it's a totally normal thing, is that we assume a base of knowledge in our students, just like our students assume they have a base of knowledge, and it's not always appropriate. Down here. What'd you come up with?
A couple of different things that students don't know. We don't always share a common vocabulary, like with tech. Someone who's kind of immersed in it might use vocabulary and assume that others understand. And we both kind of shared similar experiences in, I call it the my students aren't me syndrome. And it comes in a lot of different ways. I sort of feel it as a parent sometimes too. But as a teacher, when I first started teaching it was I taught them the way I learned. And assumed that they too would learn because I learned really well that way, and so why wouldn't they? And it turned out, this comes as a surprise, it didn't really work well for everyone.
And it's an amazing thing, and one of the things, if I skip over it, remind me to come back to, is even the way we were taught, even if it wasn't what appealed to you, some of the views we have about what works for teaching and learning is not being supported by the evidence. And maybe we have to rethink some of the concepts of teaching and learning for what actually has been documented as working better. To you in the back?
Mine were basically what these guys said, assuming knowledge in students that they don't have, and assuming, the way I've taught over 15 years had to change because they changed a bit. They really did. Yeah. So.
Thinking they were interested and as excited, students, our students, are fabulously excited about legislative history as I am. That sort of thing of, no, they're not.
How could you not find this to be the most interesting thing?
That's exactly it, so that's.
No, I'm totally with you, I do that all the time.
But it keeps your excitement up, right?
You hope it's contagious at least, but.
Interestingly enough, it's happened to me several times and it's brought me up short every single time, and I should have learned by now. Instead of being sort of what I consider to be a real librarian and going from a very square one reference interview to start assuming that a student of a certain age wants to start with an electronic resource and have them say, is this available on paper? Because actually.
Awesome. I mean, the assumptions that just based on, and assumptions are an amazing thing. You're good.
Well, I learned two things, actually. I had discarded the Socratic method, and this young man told me that it works. I didn't know what the answer was, and he got me to it by just saying, well, how about this, how about that? So it works. My biggest problem is a little different being a law professor than librarians, and that is that it's hitting me with this generation more than any before. I always assumed that all the students came with the same desire, succeed, that they were all worried about not failing, that they all cared, that they all had good manners. So I was one of those professors that was against kicking students out of class when they were late because they're adults and adults learn. And after 24 years, I'm starting to learn that that's not the case. For example, we use this number system for anonymity. And they have to get a little card, write their name, and in my last exam, 15 of them used the wrong number. So I finally said, if you use the wrong number, you are losing 5 points, and the next test, 0. So that's something I changed. I learned that they're not as responsible as I assumed they are when they came.
So, Deb, can I make one point on Brandis? And he mentioned that he assumed that they trusted him. He's IT. They trusted him, which I thought was an interesting thing, and maybe a lot of us do, that they at least trust us to know what we're talking about.
Well, especially in IT, like, I mean, they know more than me now. I mean, I don't.
I have students who come into my class and think they know more than me in a subject I've been teaching for 20 years. I mean, do they not realize that I spend 3 to 5 hours preparing for every class, and they spend 3 to 5 hours, unfortunately, preparing for all of them? You know, and not all of them, that's not fair, because many of my students work very, very hard. Yes?
I think there's also just this, I found that I'll make assumptions just about their backgrounds and what they're coming at. So when I first started working, I met Penn, which is kind of like Duke, and met there a lot of big fish, suddenly they went to a lot of other big fish. But I was, at first I assumed that, like, I just made this assumption that they had, like, had summer jobs and work growing up and doing some, and then I had some blank stares and realized, like, no, none of you have worked before. And, but then I made that, I like flipped that assumption, so then I would say things where I'd be like, you know, I'd find myself thinking like, okay, well, none of you have worked, but it's not true. There are a lot of people who did work growing up, who did have other experiences and stuff, so I had to be careful not to like completely flip that.
Well, it's,
with the big fish in it, it's easy to assume that if they don't understand it, they'll let you know, and they almost never know how to ask for help. So, I mean, that's something I try to hit right from the beginning. Is, like, how do you say, like, I've spent too much time, you know, in my class I have like a 15-minute rule. If you've tried to do one thing for 15 minutes and having found the answer in any method you know, stop. Because I never want to read that you spent 2 hours trying to figure out something.
See, and I want to read that they spent 2 hours trying to figure out.
But I can talk technology tasks.
But no, I understand that. These are all really interesting. And again, it all comes down to assumptions. These are prior knowledge and beliefs that are so ingrained, but we need to check out our own assumptions on a regular basis. And we need to get our students to recognize and check out their own assumptions, because it is so integral to what we're doing. You know, I was at sessions yesterday talking about assessment and how do you get people to adopt assessment and how do they perceive assessment. You know, one of the things I have heard from many people over the years is that faculty are concerned with some of these things because they're concerned that the microscope might not show them up as well as they'd like, and even if that's not the point, that's how they assume it to be. So assumptions is really this core issue that pervades everything we do. And from Alan's presentation yesterday, I was thinking, I used to use 2-minute mysteries to help my students think about the assumptions they're making so they can unpack them and then work with them. But using your Flickr idea of different ways to describe a picture, I'm thinking of giving them some crime scenes and letting them in criminal law describe what happened and to see the possibilities that just because you believe that that's what happened doesn't necessarily make it so. Now, let me back up and remind you all that we need assumptions to function, okay? If you don't wake up with the assumption every morning that gravity is still here, the air is still breathable, you know, you won't go floating off when you step out of bed, it doesn't work. And so I'm not criticizing assumptions, I'm not suggesting we give up assumptions. I'm suggesting we be more aware, reflective, cognitively thinking about what are they and what's the impact on what I'm doing. Because when I'm training lawyers, one of my core goals, one of the core skills and objectives I have of my entire program is to help them become better reflective thinkers. I think it's important for teaching yourself to be a lifelong learner, and I think it's important for being a good lawyer. Lawyers have to be able to see the possibilities, right? They can't just see it once and be done. So, what I'd like to talk about for the rest of our time is what have I come up with for this and what might you add so that I get better ideas. And if you don't get a chance to do it now, feel free to join in on the Slack and give me ideas later. So, what is it that I have come up with? Transparency, okay? Transparency is something I talk to my students about for years. Now again, transparency is a relative thing because as I have noticed, I have lots of assumptions of the knowledge they might bring, and I have to constantly unpack that and see, oh well, maybe not. Maybe I need to back up a little bit longer. I've been doing this a long time, and you kind of may forget how to go back and break it down, deconstruct it into the very primary steps. I'll get to that in a minute. In transparency, my favorite example is for the law student who comes in and says, oh, I know how to read. All of those instructions in the first orientation have nothing to do with me. I know how to read. I know how to take notes on my reading. I'm fine. I don't need all this reading and reading stuff. That's for everyone else. That goes back to your big fish. I know how to do it. I'm an expert. I'm fine. Look, I got through undergrad. I know how to read. So over the years, rather than just telling them to read the cases and how to read the cases, I stopped. I said, okay, what is so different about law school reading that I need them to do it differently? And I realized that most of them in an undergraduate career have been reading secondary sources. Very few of them have been working with the primary sources in an undergraduate career. So when you read the secondary source that has analyzed and distilled it for you, it's very different than when you're going back to reading cases and you need to analyze and distill it. That's what the brief is. It's taking a primary source and creating a secondary source for reference, which you can read quickly. And I've actually gotten to the point where I start talking to them about this. I said, I understand you know how to read. You're a great reader. It got you here. But reading in law school is different. So your prior ability to read might be great when you're reading a law treatise, you know, the concise version, but it won't work as well or effectively when you are reading a primary source. It's a different set of skills. Now, if you have that skill, that's great. But if not, let me talk to you about it. Now I have sort of said, okay, I'm not questioning your skill. I'm not questioning your ability. I'm not saying you don't know how to do reading. Of course you do. I'm saying that I'm going to add a new layer on, and I'm being incredibly transparent about it, and I'm answering the 2-year-old's question. Why? 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 Right? Everything you say? Why? My mother finally said, because I'm the mother. So, transparency is my first one. And I'd love to hear other suggestions, so jot them down because we'll take some time at the end to do this, of things you think we could be more transparent about. My second one goes to the philosophy that no matter how much we tell them, they don't quite believe us until they do it themselves. Now, again, guilty in life, right? Probably not alone. Some of you have been told, right, your parents told you, do as I say, not as I do. Trust me. How many of us trusted? Don't see a lot of hands. So, it's kind of like the student who has to touch the hot stove. So the next thing I try to do to help my students really sort of think about the assumptions they are bringing and unpack them is called the non-legal examples to do it. Okay? Now, this is a game I play with them, and I tell them that they have to teach me how to do something. Something simple, and most of you have seen it. And the best visual I got on this was when a student of mine who used to be a dancer came and was lost in law school. She was lost on lots of things, how to deconstruct and whatever, but clearly she was just jumping to conclusions, skipping lots of steps, making a lot of assumptions about using knowledge that had existed in her past life to try and make it work. So I said to her, okay, please teach me how to do a plie. You're a dancer. Teach me to do a plie. And so she said, okay, I can do that. That's easy. Put your heels together and bend. So I put my heels together and I bend. Now, some of you may not be dancers, but that is not a plie. And she was aghast. Oh my God, no. I said, but I did what you told me to do, right? I put my heels together and I bent. But that's not what I meant. But that's what you said. No, you have to put your feet together but turn the toes out. And then you have to bend, but you have to bend from the knees. Now I'm wearing the dress because I was told that the capris that I was going to wear to the baseball game tonight weren't good for presentation when you were videoed. But, so you couldn't really see that, but that's what a plie is. Okay, and my plies aren't very good. But do you see how much we assume in life? And in that moment she realized, and she had to be more reflective about the whole thing. The final way, of course, goes to early assessment. We want to assess early. And you know, someone was saying the other day how, yeah, at some level you almost want to scare them. And I don't mean scare them in a way out of law school or anything, but you want them to realize that this is different. Take it seriously now. Don't wait until the end of the semester when the grades are in and now you're not doing what you want. You know, then it's harder to fix. And so in terms of early assessment, I do a lot of that. I do a lot of very low stakes formative assessment where I give them what would have been the grade and they are like, oh my God. And when they're done arguing me that I'm wrong, most of them, if they're able to get out of their own way and see that, no, I'm not the expert here, I've got to learn this, and she is trying to facilitate this, shepherd me through this process, if they can get to that point, which is a huge step, it's a huge change, and there's a lot of resistance, because it's hard to feel like you're the novice again. Then I have the ability to really, really work with them and make a difference. And so I wanted to share this because, as Isaac Asimov says, your assumptions are your windows on the world, and if you scrub them off every once in a while, if you don't scrub them off every once in a while, the light won't come in. And I think it's a very macro, backing up, not specific issue, but something that will really help us in the ways we live our everyday life. And so for me, my Don Quixote quest continues. I will continue working to try and figure out how I get students to do this sooner and faster and better, how I can do this sooner and faster and better. But I'd love to spend our last 10 minutes, and actually I'm timed it right, hearing some of the things that you might want to do, or hearing some of your questions or views or thoughts on this subject matter. So, I'm opening up for discussion. Jill.
When I taught more, I used to tell my legal research students, when we discussed secondary sources, I said, here's something I did when I was a law student, and I guarantee you that one of you is going to come to me, I'm going to make a bet with you now. And I said, I thought to myself, I'm smart, I don't need secondary sources, I can read a primary source and figure it out for myself, and you know, why do I need to waste my time doing this? Outing myself as being a snotty law student once. And I realized that, yeah, sure I'm smart, but you know, why am I cutting myself off at the knees by not taking advantage of the distillation that an expert has done for me? I said, and here's the bet I have for you, my class. One of you, at least, is going to come to me by the end of this class and say, I was one of those people, I thought I could do it on my own, you were right. I never lost that bet.
That's great. And I, on the other hand, worry because so many students think they can use the shortcut of some of the case briefs. And they don't ever want to do the actual distillation and thing. So I mean, again, every
balance of it.
It is.
And that's use that to get you started and on the right path, and then go, you know.
Exactly. And so what happens is they say, okay, because that's what I tell them too. It's to provide either a forest before you read or a forest after you read to bring it all together. But they're like, oh, wait a minute, no, I don't have to read. And so, you know, again, it's.
I think when I'm thinking about assumptions and unlearning, we've been having a small dialogue at our law school about, among the staff, just about sort of fixed versus growth mindset and the mindsets that people come in with, and the idea that not only when you come in with a fixed mindset of I'm smart, this is how smart I am, and there's no chance of improving that, if they come in thinking I'm really smart, then they kind of refuse to do the things like admit when they need help or something, which, so that's kind of, I think it's important sometimes to stress to students that they should try and adapt this growth idea as opposed to just sort of maintaining their fixed, pre-established smartness, and kind of breaking out of that and learning that part of growing is asking other people for help, not knowing what to do, things like that. So I feel like it's kind of all those together.
I think you're absolutely right, and that's one of those major assumptions that Carol Dweck talks about, is that people come in honestly, foundationally believing that they are smart and that if you're not smart, you can't learn, and if you are smart, you can. And I have the students who come in thinking that they're not smart, and that means they can't learn, and they have that burden to carry. So again, a really core assumption that impacts a ton of our students. Here and there.
So one of the things that I've started doing more and more over the years to try to work on developing growth mindsets, and I haven't thought about it this way, but it really does, I think, unpack some of their early assumptions about what they do and how they do it. I do a lot of self-assessment. And I used to start late because I thought they had to learn something before they could self-assess. And then I realized they were learning something from jump, and I just needed to create my self-assessment tools that help them to assess the small thing that the particular assignment was asking them to learn. So if they write, you know, if they outline a rule or identify a rule, then I say, okay, here is your self-assessment tool. There were 3 or 4 pieces that they have to identify, and they very quickly say, oh my gosh, I missed this and this. And then they're not surprised or upset when they then get my feedback that mostly just confirms that they discovered they were right, and it also helps to foster their growth mindset because it shows them that they can take a thing that they did, identify the problems with it, and then make it better. Which is what we're trying to teach them to do ultimately when they leave us. So it's actually been a really powerful, transformative thing in my class, and I'm still working on kind of getting better at it.
We're all, I think, always working on refining and improving, and I actually took it back to before the substance. I had them assess their reading for what they did for class, before and after, before you come in. Do you think you're prepared for class? Did you get out of the reading what you needed? And then at the end of class, having had the class, what do you think? Because I really want them to I want them to be lifelong learners in whatever they do. I don't care if it's law or anything. I don't care. I want them to learn to be lifelong learners. And that requires them to assess.
This kind of addresses the same thing you were. In the session yesterday, you said it was about about formative assessments, and you said, can you clarify a little bit more about what the assumptions, the relationship between the assumptions and creating a rubric? And I would think I'm getting it a little bit more now than what you said. Does that? You kind of understand what I'm saying? I need a little
So
bit
we were talking yesterday about when you create rubrics. People think rubrics are objective, right? Rubrics are, you go through and you check off which category you might fall into this box, I fall into that box. And that's a generic and overgeneralization, but it's a generalization that a lot of people share about rubrics. Am I wrong? Tell me if I'm wrong. It's okay, I'm wrong all the time. That's the other thing I have to tell my students. I'm wrong all the time. It's okay to tell me. I misspeak, I misread, I'm wrong. But, am I wrong?
No, I'm just stressing.
Oh, you're stressing.
Not stressing.
Okay, so rubrics are a great way to grade. I use them all the time. I've got to the point where I use them because what I found I was doing is that I had a points list, and I was basically only testing their ability to put the knowledge on the page, and I wasn't giving enough credit to synthesis, and I wasn't giving enough credit to the people who didn't throw up on paper with all the extraneous stuff. And so it dawned on me at one point, and again, I've graded well over 2,000, probably many more now. Doing this for more than 20 years, you figure 100 a year, I've done over 2,000, you know? So it dawned on me that I was not testing all of my learning objectives. So I had to rethink that, and a rubric allowed me to sort of break it out into that. It also allowed me to simplify and sort of say, I'm not going point by point, I'm going more holistically, much more like a bar examiner grades on an issue, but still in more detail. But the truth of the matter is rubrics are subjective. Because if you and I sit down with the same papers and the same rubric, we will perceive the information differently because we read words differently. English language is not hard and fast. The words, the example I use for my students is what's the definition of an opinion, what's the definition of bias, and what's the definition of prejudice. And if you can show me they're really different, that'll be interesting because they're not. Yet, when I say those words, if I say you have an opinion, or I say you have a prejudice, That is a totally different feeling, right? So when I talk about that, again, the words aren't clear, and so I think we create a disconnect. And again, I think it's generational because, you know, when I grew up, they didn't use rubrics. You know, I didn't have a rubric. I didn't get an exam back in law school. I got a grade. You know, I don't know if I could have gone and looked at an exam. What an interesting concept. Never dawned on me. So does that answer it? So I was getting to the issue, and in talking to him afterwards, he acknowledged that it is, at some measure, subjective. So when you're trying to take those issues and make them normative for a program, there's still a disconnect, because how I read the rubric and how you read the rubric, and I'm honest with my students. I tell them I will not just reread one exam, because 3 weeks later, 3 months later, if I read it, I might read it differently. Having read all of them and had 3 months to have it gel in my brain that I did when I read them all there. Now, I do read randomly a whole bunch, and I revise my key, and I recognize, you know, the reason I don't give out my grading key, I have a rubric I give out, but I don't give out my grading points thing, because I write an exam and then they read it differently, right? I think I'm testing X issue, and I am testing X issue, but they also see Y, that I was like, and about 1 in 8 or 10 times, they're right. It's like, oh, I could be read that way, couldn't I? Huh, that was a good argument. That gets points. That's what I want a lawyer to do. So to me, does that answer what you were asking about? Does that clarify it?
I think so. It's just that your assumptions are there in creating the rubric and in grading it. Yeah.
And that even if someone gives me a rubric that I decide to use, I'm going to interpret it differently. And I don't know how to fix that. I honestly don't know that we can fix that, because we can't all view words the same. You know, I tell my students, part of writing an exam is good communication skills in all of our areas, right? The ability to communicate clearly is incredibly important, and we all need to work on doing that better, both verbally and in writing. But, you know, how do I read the words the same way you'll read the words? I don't have an answer to that. Perfect. Anyway, I would love to hear any of your thoughts, comments, suggestions. As I said, it's not the traditional CALItech thing, but Elmer thought that you all would find it interesting.
That's great.
Thank you.